You're listening to Parasearch UK Radio. News, views and reviews from the world of the paranormal from across the UK and beyond. Find us on Facebook, Twitter and the World Wide Web. Parasearch UK Radio.
The views and opinions expressed by presenters and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Parasearch UK Radio or its affiliates and sponsors. Listener discretion is advised.
You're listening to The Spirit Dimension with your host, Kerry Greenaway, right here on Parasearch Radio.
Good evening and welcome to the Spirit Dimension. My name is Kerry Greenaway and I'm joined in the studio tonight by the lovely Clare Hinks. Good evening, Clare.
Good evening, Kerry. Hello, world. Hope you're all well this evening.
And tonight we have a very special guest with us. We have got international psychic medium, a psychic development life coach, and a paranormal researcher and investigator, Mr. William Becker. Good evening, William. How are you?
Good evening to both of you. I'm doing well. Thrilled to be here.
Well, we're very, very thrilled to have you with us tonight on the show. And it's been a long time. I've been wanting to speak to you on a one-to-one kind of basis on a show since September when we met at Paraforce.
Right. There were so many people there. It was difficult to have much of a one-on-one conversation and really do much more than say hello to people. But are you going again this year?
Yeah, I'm a speaker this year.
Oh, congratulations.
Oh, dear. I still can't quite believe it, to be fair, that I'm actually a speaker at Paraforce this year. Oh, dear. Every time I think about it, my heart just stops.
You'll be great. You'll be great.
You will be great. It'll be. You'll keep feeling like that. You'll be scared until it's over.
Well, I'm absolutely crapping it. But that's a different topic completely. Let's get on to something I'm quite good at, which is interviewing people. Oh, dear. I always get worried when the tables get turned onto me. It's a weird old scenario. Anyway, William, good evening. Can you tell everybody who might not know, what is it you actually do? Because you do something very, very special. You do life coaching in a very intuitive way, don't you, psychically?
Right. And it works with past lives and helping people discern a little bit more of what our path is this time. Why are we here? How do we become more fully ourselves? And for me, part of that also includes opening up in a psychic way to the world around us, but also, well, just as little examples, you have somebody that loves the water or somebody who's deathly afraid of water, and then you do a reading, and a past life reading, and you find out that they drowned 3 times and were subject to the dunking test for witchcraft or something. And it helps explain where that comes from. Or somebody who was a healer and worked with herbs in several different lifetimes and is a botanist now, or loves the herbs and the things they can do. And you can see the process and the progress. And okay, you've been a healer all these times. It's part of your soul. Maybe a career in medicine, maybe a career in holistic health, or things like that can help people discern a little bit more about who they are and what they're about. And I just help people discover themselves, basically.
It is a part of that, isn't it? It really is a part of learning about yourself. And that's not just yourself in this dimension or realm. It's about learning yourself on so many different levels, isn't it?
It is. And I find that certain basic things usually repeat. I've run into cases where there doesn't seem to be a lot of connection, but almost always there seems to be certain themes that repeat. And sometimes it's lessons that need to be learned. Sometimes it's strengths that people have and they enjoy doing. Sometimes, okay, let's try breaking the mold this time and not repeating that mistake again.
Do you find that people remake that mistake time and time again because they just haven't learnt it in this particular, lifetime, or it is things that have come from the past that they've got to relearn?
In the cases that I've been exposed to, I find that it's usually a pattern from past lives up through this one, and this is giving them a chance to make that change. I'm not going to say that that's the case all the time. It's just the ones that I have worked with.
Yeah.
And a good therapist. And sometimes I recommend people talk to a good therapist. I'm not a therapist. I have a bachelor's in history, a master's in public administration, and in no way am I qualified for mental health or physical health diagnoses or anything else. But sometimes I suggest that maybe a medical profession of a type might be able to help somebody work with some of the issues.
It's quite difficult sometimes, isn't it? Because when I've had clients come to me, sometimes it's a very fine line, and you sort of say, well, maybe you should try that way as well as working in the spiritual. So it's sort of covering both bases, because like you say, we're not doctors, we're not mental health psychologists or anything like that, but there are certain things you can do to take responsibility for your own spiritual well-being, but
right.
I'm not a doctor. And if there's an underlying physical issue that could be affecting it, we need to look at that too.
Exactly. And sometimes there are patterns, psychological patterns that have developed from childhood. And it's a way of carrying out the learning process, perhaps. And so there's the spiritual side of that. But there can also be the mental health therapist side of that can help break those patterns too. That can be very much part of the healing and learning process this time. We know things now, and we know how to do things now that we didn't know how to do 500 years ago or 50 years ago. And it's important to use all the tools available, I think.
I agree. I actually agree with that, Claire.
It goes a little bit with what I was going to say. It goes a little bit with what we were talking about the other day, Kerry, last weekend, wasn't it? About being mindful. It's your whole well-being, isn't it?
It is
right.
Being responsible for self. If you recognize, your first step is always recognizing that there may be an issue, whether that be a spiritual issue, whether that be a physical issue, whatever that be. It's partly is recognizing that. Secondly, taking responsibility for your part that you played in that, and thirdly, dealing with it,
Exactly.
and just dealing with that in whatever form that takes. It's dealing with that issue, and there's so many.
And for some people, it's accepting, isn't it, that it's more than just a physical. You need a doctor. For some people, it's accepting that it might be a spiritual, mindful issue is a big step on its own, isn't it? For us, it's easy because we are spiritual, but for some people, it's not that simple.
Exactly. And I was very fortunate. I had a therapist for years that actually helped work with the spiritual side and the metaphysical side with me, and she encouraged me in the work I'm doing now, and to be professional with it. And we worked with my own doctors. And I don't mean it to sound like there's any big issue, but frankly, most in this country, I think just about everybody could use a good therapist at some point in their life. I don't know about the UK, but here the society can be one that sets up a lot of a lot of trauma, I think, in a sense. There's
Okay.
so much having to be this perfect image of something, and it's not realistic.
I totally agree with that. I totally
Yeah.
agree. The pressure that life puts on you sometimes is so immense, and I think people underplay that a lot. The day-to-day pressures, and then when you do have that moment where you can't cope or you are having trouble when you're questioning everything you do, the pressure can be immense, and it's an accumulation, that's a better word, accumulation of so many factors. It's not just one thing. It might be the one thing that triggered everything, but when you start
Right.
questioning, going into a spiritual way, when you start questioning your own belief system or your own way of working, it can be very fundamental. But as somebody said to me recently, sometimes you have to go back to basics, go back to where you started from, and then you realise how far you've come. And then you
Right.
break it down into
Yeah.
manageable chunks, and then you can step forward. This is in a spiritual way, you understand, everybody. I'm not talking about real mental health issues or anything like that. I'm talking about in a spiritual way. And sometimes when you go to someone like William or myself or Claire, then you break it down to basics, and then you see how far you've come, and then you can pick yourself back up and move forward with that. And that's quite fundamental in moving forward with your own spiritual development and journey.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, now
I
one of
think-
the... Sorry, carry on,
Okay.
William.
Oh, I was just going to say, I believe it was Plato that talked about the telos, and we are each called to be our own unique individual being, and I think to be as fully ourselves as we can be. And it takes a lot of work on a spiritual plane and a lot of awareness to really discover that and to let that grow and develop. It's not the emotional, it's not a out there type of a sensation. It takes some real inner dialogue
I
and
agree.
allowing things to develop. So
Oh, I totally agree with that. Kaz Rooney in our chat room has just put, do we not put ourselves through trauma trying to live up to others' expectations and not being ourselves? But sometimes that confidence of being yourself is so difficult when you have so many expectations on you from other people.
that's true. I'm fortunate. My cousins told me when I turned 60 a little over a year ago, my cousins, they're all older than I am, said, okay, now you can join the I'll phrase it nicely, I don't care club. And it's very freeing. You know, I don't have to try to impress people.
I think that's an age thing,
No.
though, isn't it? It's a very much of an age thing. You get to a point where you think, oh, you know what? Go away with your dramas and your traumas. I can't be bothered with it anymore. I've seen too
Exactly.
much. I've lived too much.
Yeah.
I've done too much. And actually,
I
at the
think
end,
the older you get, the more relaxed you get.
Yeah.
The less you care. Every year, I care less.
As long as I'm being as authentically myself as I can be,
Yes.
and not deliberately trying to do harm or hurt people, and if I make a mistake, own up to it. I mean, that doesn't mean I don't care if I hurt somebody's feelings inadvertently. But yeah, it's freeing. Once my parents both passed away, I just didn't have anybody whose opinion I had to be quite that careful about. It seems like so.
on one way, that's quite sad, but in another way, it's very freeing. And like you said, if you're authentically being yourself, it doesn't really matter what anybody says, because the only person you have to answer to is yourself. And as long as you know you're being credible and authentic to self, then that is what's key. And if you can look at yourself in the mirror and know that you're okay, you're doing all right, you've got a good heart, you're doing it with good intention, and you're not setting out to hurt anybody, then you're a good person and you're doing all right. Do you know what I mean?
And you're attracting those people who appreciate the true you,
That's
not
right.
some image that you're putting out. And I think they're more honest relationships actually that way, and healthier.
Very true.
Yeah, because people are in your life because they like the you that you are.
Exactly.
For all those flaws and imperfections, it doesn't matter. We all have them, you know. And
Yeah.
sometimes it's about embracing that as well.
Yes, I mean, those can help us to actually develop a little bit more fully understanding, compassion, things like that. I had a doctor that he wound up with some pretty severe health issues, and before he had to retire, he said, well, one of the things about it is it made him a better doctor because he could emphasize more closely with some of his patients. He could understand from his own experience now what they were going through. Mm-hmm. And,
empathy.
I'm sorry?
Empathy. He was able to, relate more.
Yeah.
I wish he could still practice, but oh well.
That tends to be the way when someone hits that point of understanding, they're then retiring. It's like, damn it, they've retired and they were really getting me and I really understood it. And, but that's life, I suppose. Now, one of the reasons I actually wanted to speak with you tonight, William, was you did a talk at Paraforce regarding elementals.
Mm-hmm.
Now, This is an area that is one of the most misunderstood, I feel, in the paranormal field, and quite integral to a lot of sites that we actually investigate. So would you give me your overview, basically, of what an elemental is to start us off with?
Okay. First of all, I want to just put it out there. I'm one of these people that very much needs to see to believe. I believe in a lot of possibilities, but unless I've seen something with my own two eyes, I may trust somebody else who's telling me in their honesty, but maybe not their interpretation. And so when I talk about the elementals, it means I haven't seen all of them, but I have physically seen some with my own two eyes. And I don't do hallucinogenics, and I don't take meds that do that, and it hasn't had anything to drink involved. And I mean, all the things that you have to check with when you're dealing with somebody who makes this claim. So it's not something that's just I'm esoterically pulling out of the air. It's something I've actually experienced. And I started quite a while ago thinking, well, maybe the gods and all these other mythical creatures really were elementals that are in and out of a parallel universe or another dimension, whatever it works out to be with quantum mechanics and all of that. And that would explain why we have so many stories from so many cultures that the beings look similar, they overlap, and some of that could have been because of what the message was the stories is trying to impart, but then it could also be, hey, maybe these are real beings. And I have, I've seen a tree spirit coming out of the tree. I've seen a dwarf-like entity a couple of times. I've seen elfish-type beings a few times in the woods, or, the other names for them I can't really remember. And I've had what I call fairy lights and a number of other things, and I've had communication with them, both in this world and then psychically in other worlds. And it's very much that there are a whole series of beings out there, and they interact with us sometimes, and they're unique and individual just like we are. I don't lump a bunch of, you stay away from this group because they're this, or this group is that. The folklore I don't buy into so much. I treat with respect, but I do that with everybody. And I think we can interact and be friends with them at times, as long as we're not looking to abuse and we give them respect. I don't know, did that answer the question?
I think so, very much so. Now, elementals generally link to a specific element, like fire, air, water, earth, even. And then there's the fifth one, which is spirit. That's generally what it is, in my experience with elementals. I also see them as a neutral energy that you should very, very much treat with respect. In the UK, we have a lot of folklore surrounding elementals, and what you should do and how you should treat them and all the rest of it. And there's loads of myths and legends that surround elementals, isn't there?
Yes, there is. And I try not to go in thinking too much about that. I try to have my own experience with them and let them tell me who they are and what they want.
We have had a question in the chat room. Now, this is a subject which I don't agree with, basically, because I don't think you can control elementals in regards to this particular subject. But I'll ask you, William, because we'll see what your opinion is. It said, what about the control of certain earth elements like rain, localised rain, wind, fire, all those different elements? Do you believe that you can control that?
It's not something I have seen. Over here, most of what we talk about with elementals is probably more the spiritual one, and the ones not as much associated with things like fire and wind and water, but with, to use the names out of the books, the elves, the fairies, the brownies, the sprites, the dwarves, all of those things. So my reference is a little different, but I tend to agree. These are beings that are working in a different way and have their own path and their own destiny and their own need to do whatever it is that they're supposed to do. And I don't think we should even try to control them. I don't think that would work very well if we did. I think we'd wind up the losing end of it.
Yeah, I'll be honest with you. I understand that completely. Having worked in certain ways, there are certain things you can do to conjure certain spirits, and then you bind and then you control in that way. But even then, that's not elemental energy. That's a completely different energy. And I personally wouldn't mess with elemental energy in that way. You can utilize it, work with it, but you can't control it.
Right. And to me, trying to control it would be just like trying to control another human being. To me, it's wrong. I mean, it's like turning another being into a slave.
So I'm just going to chip in here because I haven't had that much experience with elementals. The work that I do is with our spirits, as in people's family members that have passed, etc. A bit of angels work I've done, but nothing really with elementals. So maybe you could explain, William, for me and anybody else that doesn't know, how do you go about working with elementals? Do you specifically do something? Do you have something in mind? Do you call upon an elemental, or are you just lucky enough to have been, wandering through the woods and seen a tree folk or something? Do you know what I mean? Like, how does it work for you?
Mostly the latter, wandering through and seeing, being open to it, putting out a message that I'm open to meeting somebody if they're there. And sometimes I haven't even done that. It's just, I just happened to be fortunate enough to see something. And including in the middle of the day, so it's definitely not a nighttime. And those, you can be pretty sure, too, aren't your eyes trying to give your brain what it's looking for. No. Because that's one of the things I look at, too. But yes, no, I don't try to call or conjure anything, including human entities or spirits. I invite or open to whatever's around that wants to come and talk to me to do so.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, to me, it's more respectful.
In my experience with elementals, they've come close in regards to I haven't seen, but I feel energy. So I feel that difference in energy signature when it's an elemental. And generally, they'll come close to watch what you're doing to make sure, like, generally if I've been investigating in woods or working in a specific way in woods, they'll come close to check what you're doing, make sure that you're not doing anything to harm an area that they're in or looking at, and then they'll withdraw because they're like, well, that's nothing to do with me. I'm not prepared to, I won't interfere with that if you don't interfere with what I'm doing. You know what I mean? The only time that I had a close contact with an elemental, I was actually in a wood doing an investigation, funny enough, and we were doing the human pendulum, and the elemental, the watcher, as we called it, came forward, and it was like, I'd love to talk to you right now, but you're in a body that that doesn't know what they're doing, and this isn't right. And I will talk to you afterwards, but right now, thanks very much for coming forward, but it's not the right time kind of moment. And if I'd been dealing with somebody who knew what they were doing, I would have continued with that. But as it was at the time, it wasn't the right time. And it worried me because although I know what I'm doing with those kind of energies, that person doesn't. So it was very, very, thank you very much. We're very respectful. Thank you for stepping forward. Thank you for wanting to, engage. But this isn't the right time or the place. And they were quite happy to, it was quite happy to go back to watching and doing what it did. And it was really interested, actually, in what we were doing. But what I do with energy in regards to working is very specific in regards to its energy work. It's not working psychically or mediumistically or stuff like that. It's energy work. And I'm very lucky. I'm able enough to know what I'm doing in that field. Whereas, as I say, the person who I was working with at the time was just there for an experience. So it wasn't that kind of experience she was after. She wanted, the typical ghost hunting experience. So it wasn't the right time or the place. So in that instance, I had to ask them to step back and not engage in that way. And then later on, when the guests are gone, I went back and discussed what was going on. And this elemental wasn't particularly happy with something that was going on in that area, and I helped out. And everything was happy. Do you know what I mean? So it's about mutual respect because they are very linked to the area that they're in or the element that they're working within. So, for example, water elements will be very, very concerned, obviously, with the element they work with, which is water, or air, and generally, when you start working with those different elementals, they can help and they will work with you, but you can't control them. They will only do what they want to do. And they're quite mischievous at times as well. Do you not find that, William?
Yes, they are. And I had one, I was at West Kennet Longbarrow, and there was one hanging around with me that it was a psychic, not a physical experience with him, and an energy piece. And I try not to label them exactly, but I asked him, what would you like me to call you? And he said a sprite. And so I did. But it was because he told me, not me labeling him. And it, he looked kind of like, and I use he because he came across as a male energy, a male entity. And we didn't have a long conversation, but just mostly acknowledging each other and saying hello, basically.
Yeah. There's usually an acknowledgement, isn't there? They come and acknowledge the work you're doing, you acknowledge the work they do, and then that's sort of as far as it goes.
Right. I was trying to read what I could of the place, the spirituality, what's attached or associated with it, the layers, and he came as part of that in the area. And this is right out in the middle of fields. I mean, you wander through several acres on a path of blooming flowers on the way out here. It's not like it was in the middle of a wood or anything. Not a tree in sight. But it was a very rewarding experience.
Oh, it can be. It can be some of the most profound experiences you have when you link with nature elements, more than any other kind of spirit. Now, David has asked in the chat room, do you think elementals are related to the jinn? the jinn, sorry, or are they separate entities?
That's a good question, and I'd need to study a little bit more about the jinn. It's not my cultural tradition. In this life, I haven't been to the Middle East other than Istanbul. It's as close as I've gotten. And so they sound like they're similar to both elementals that we talk about, and maybe kind of a wisdom spirit, because they sound like they're very wise as well, a knowledge-based entity.
Elementals are, yeah.
They are too, but it sounds like the jinn are as well. Maybe they are a form of elemental. I'm just not sure. It's a good question.
It is a good question. I personally would say that they were separate. They were different. I would say that elementals are linked to earth energies, that they're older, that they're not the same energy signature. I've not come across a jinn, so I don't know, or jinn, or however you say that word, but I've not come across one, so I'm not speaking from an experience point of view, just from a basic knowledge point of view. But I personally would say that they are different entities.
And that certainly
from
makes
what
sense.
I know about elementals, I would say they're a lot more linked to the earth and are a lot more older in their energy signature and will work in a completely different way to what I understand the jinn do. So I personally would say they're not related. But,
okay, that makes a lot of sense.
I could be proved wrong on that.
Okay. And for me, the elementals even, there have been so many different layers. Close over to you, actually, Clare, and I know I'm not saying it right, but St. Nectar's Glen.
Oh, St. Nectar's Glen.
Yes, and you walk down to the waterfall.
It's lovely.
It is. And there are all these little towers people build and bright ribbons on the trees. And there's one element or one layer of elemental that they remind me of the fraternity and sorority idea of let's party. And they love it because it's a party. But the deeper what's a good word for this? Anyway, there's a deeper, more thoughtful, more ancient being and energy there that is very upset about it because people aren't getting the full depth of what that place is and its true depth of spirituality.
I walked. I actually had never been there before. Just interrupting you briefly. My friend and I walked that path from all the way down to the waterfall, and the further we went, the more intense it got. If that makes sense. The feeling was stronger the further in you went, and it was very magical, if you like. It did feel very elemental.
Mm-hmm. There weren't many people around when I went. I could go quite some ways without seeing another human, and that helped. And when I was down at the falls, I was down there by myself most of the time. And it was helpful that way. But I find, too, I was in a forest looking for Bigfoot, who I did see, and who I also think is a type of an elemental, in that it goes between dimensions at least. And the elementals that were around us there were socialized, in a sense, with humans. But you could tell, deeper into the woods, it was a very much wilder group, and they weren't a group that I'd really have cared to be around much, because they didn't know what to do with us, and so they wouldn't have been helpful. They would have been more harmful, just out of a natural defensive territorial piece, I think. It's the way it came across and the way I was reading them. I don't know if that makes sense to you too.
I would say that the more touristy type sites where you've got those kind of energies would be more accustomed to humans, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they would interact on a regular basis. But I understand what you mean. They do become more accustomed to humans being around, but they kind of like leave them alone and let them get on with it. As long as everyone's respectful to the site. I think what happens is when people start interfering with the site or becoming disrespectful, they will protect their site.
Right. Mm-hmm.
They will have that. One thing I was going to ask is with elementals, you can work with them in certain ways. Now, do the different types of elementals, do they have specific areas that they work with?
I think there's overlap. I think we would like to say that there is, but I think is overlap. Mostly what I have done with them is simply, if they've been open to communication or any kind of a visit, just doing that. I haven't asked them to help me with something or to do something. I've asked to understand them and have me tell them about themselves and anything like that they would like to have done. And there are some that I've gone, and I know this sounds strange, but into their dimension to work with or to talk to and such as well. And there's a camaraderie there in a sense, but we haven't gone off and cleaned up a waterway together or made the hunters gun die or, something like that.
Would that be something you would look to do in the future? Connect more with elementals and work with them in that way, do you think?
Actually, I would. I hadn't thought about it until you mentioned it. We look at them differently here, I think, and I'm so involved. I love meeting new friends, and so I didn't even think about doing things the way you're talking about it, but I'd love to, and that's something I'd like to talk to you more about. I think you have a lot of expertise in ways I don't on this subject.
Oh, I wouldn't say that.
Well, we all have our own areas of things that we've worked on more in our own experiences, and I think we can all learn from each other. I love it.
Yeah, I agree, actually. Kerry's a secret weapon.
God, I'm blushing. No. Oh, dear, I love this faith in me that people have. I wish I had the same faith in myself.
You need it in yourself, yeah.
No, I wouldn't say that. I would just say I've had some amazing teachers myself in various ways. So, I'm very blessed with some of the people I meet and some of the information that's given to me.
But that's what's so fab, isn't it, about the community, if you like.
Amazing.
Everybody has, exactly like William says, everybody has something to give. So the more people you talk to, the more you learn, the more you take on.
Oh, I totally agree with that.
Right. And when you're talking to people face to face, you get a sense then, too, of, okay, is this person for real? Is this somebody whose information I can trust or their interpretation? I'm very skeptical about so many people out there that are, quote, experts. And it's real helpful for me when I can have conversations like this as a way of learning, opening up to new ideas. And you two are genuine, so I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, I thought, thanks. I thought that about you, actually, William. You have the loveliest voice.
Yeah. You can listen to it for hours, couldn't you?
Yeah.
The way I sort of came across elementals in the first place was working, because obviously I work with crystals and minerals in a very close way. And that's where I hit the field, really, is from a crystal and mineral point. And obviously certain crystals and minerals have certain affiliations with the elements. So that's really where I sort of started learning about elemental energy, really, was the link it's got to crystals and minerals.
Fascinating.
Sorry, I've got weird banging happening behind me in my crystal room, funny enough. And then obviously that took me a step further into learning into other areas of learning, because, you know what it's like. You start down one path and it leads you down an incredible journey generally into other areas that you didn't think you would ever learn about. And then all of a sudden you'll do a show on something and you'll learn more, or William, you'll visit a place and then learn more about something, and then something will pop up. And synchronicity is absolutely astonishing, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And it's something that, it's another reason. The first time in my life I ever felt at home was the first time I landed at Heathrow. And I didn't know anybody over there or anything else, but that was 33 and a half years ago, 34 years ago. Anyway, a long time ago. And Europe has always felt like home, but England has always felt more at home than any place. And I've had lots of lives there. But it's where I can meet people like you, both of you, and Vivian Powell, who's become a wonderful friend, David Cook, so many wonderful people, and have the conversations and get the ideas. And my friend Joe Diamond, he and I work remotely together a lot of times. He's over by Dartmoor, and he'll send me a message and say, "Who's the so and so standing by you?" And I'll say, "Oh, thanks," because if I'm doing something else, my mind's on what I'm doing or a million miles away, and anything paranormal has to practically hit me over the head to get me to notice, unless I'm turned on. And I'll say, "Oh yeah, and the Rose Lady or the Butcher or somebody is hanging out with you," or it's fun. I digress so easily. I'm sorry. Excuse me.
No, but we all do that. I mean, I'll start off talking about the subject and then go off into a completely different area. I'm called a butterfly in my research by certain people, because I'll start off researching one thing and then by the end of the night I'm on a completely different subject, and they're like, "But what about that?" And I'll be like, "Oh, yeah, but I found that out. That's even more interesting."
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Off on a tangent. They go
Like, concentrate on the subject in hand, young lady. That's what I get told quite often. But no, I mean, I would say I have a broad understanding of subjects rather than being an expert. Well, I'm not an expert in anything because I'm always learning. Always learning.
Mm-hmm.
We all are.
I love learning.
I do too.
Yeah.
And one of the things I tell people all the time, if you run across people who say that they are definitely right, or a psychic who says they're always right, run so far away from them so fast, because we don't know. And we do make mistakes, and we can understand what we are experiencing in the way that we understand it and interpret it. It doesn't mean that it's 100% correct or even correct at all. It means this is our experience. And somebody else may have a different one, and then the universe may be showing us what it does as a way to keep us happy with and not go into more than our brains can handle. Or I'm open to all kinds of possibilities, but it is what I experience, and that's how I have to phrase it. And instead of saying, "I'm right, listen to me."
I agree with that point.
I do too.
I totally agree with that. I mean, the amount of times you have a conversation with somebody and then you go away, have another conversation or research it or look into it, and you come across a different perspective, and it's taking on all those different perspectives and actually finding where you stand in that, and research, learn. It's never ending. And when you think you know it all, you can guarantee something else will come up and you'll learn something else.
Right. And I find getting too full of myself is a great way to get smacked in the kneecaps by something.
Usually the universe.
It's like, okay, get back down to size now.
Yeah, rethink that, because, you thought you was doing okay, but really and truly you still got a lot to do.
Yeah, they always find something else for you to do.
Oh gosh, yeah. Just when you think you're there, and then they'll go.
Yeah. You're never going to be there. Never. Just when you think you're there, wherever there is.
Oh, it's true.
So, William, what is the most profound experience you've had in all the time you've been working in the field and learning? Now, there's a question.
I'm going to refrain from saying everything is. Okay, I'll give an example. And if your callers decide to send the men with the white coats and the hypodermic needles after me, well, it's been nice talking to you. Because it sounds crazy, but I was walking around the Stone Age, and this is just a recent thing. It happened last fall, and so it's the one that's freshest on my mind. But I was walking around the Stone Age village with Joe just after I found out, yes, there are adders around there, right where I'd been walking in the tall grass. They would have loved it. I don't do well with poisonous snakes. We don't have them where I live, so I'm one of the few parts of the world that doesn't. But we were by the burial cairns. There were several of them there. And I stopped at one and it hit me. That's mine. I knew that's where I was buried. And that was a Neolithic Stone Age site.
Oh, wow.
And the sites had been excavated and all of that before. There wasn't anything else there. Another kind of an example was in the National Museum in Copenhagen. And I was in I think it was the Assyrian, Sumerian areas. And there was a farm implement. And I just stopped dead and said, that's mine. It just came right to me. And whether or not that particular instrument had been mine, but I had used that same kind of thing in a past life in that area. And just boom. And then the life started showing itself to me. So those are a couple of things in the last 2 years, I guess, that come through. And then I took a trip in 2016 to the villages my family was from, were Volga Germans. And so we went to Russia with Catherine the Great, and there was a tour to these villages, and watching what had happened to us over the years, and then being where my grandmother's house had stood, and things like this, and seeing my relatives and what they were going through and how they were responding. That was very profound too. Actually, I wrote a book on it, which is out through Amazon and my website. So that kind of thing. I guess those are maybe 3 different examples, but kind of in different ways. So,
how integral was that to your development? Because they're quite empowering, but questioning. You would question quite a lot of things when you come across something like that. You do question yourself, and you do have that monkey on your shoulder going, really? What is this? So
exactly.
how do you assimilate that information, I think is where I'm going with that question.
Well, I've been doing this work for a long enough period that, yes, I'm not always right, but I am good. Mm-hmm. And when I can put together the vision of me that went with something, and then find out after the fact that historically I'm correct, that gives me more confidence in the reading.
Yes.
With some of the ancient history, it's my area. I love it. I read it. I watch it. So, I have to be a little bit more careful that it's not something I put into my own head. With the Neolithic village, some of the layout and different things, Joe and I had gone there a couple years ago and didn't quite get it right, but we saw part of it. And then with this, and then seeing how it overlaps and reading some of the history that they came out with and finding, okay, the basics that I was coming up with fit the basic history of the place. So there's a good chance that I'm right. I'm not going to swear either one of them are correct. But they triggered the whole thing, and it didn't feel like my imagination trying to do something. It felt like the psychic part of my brain working. And that's something I work with students with, is keeping track and getting to know how does it feel when it's your imagination working? How does it feel when it's a psychic revelation that you are able to then verify so you know it's correct? And so in those cases, I couldn't tell. Now with the research in Russia, some of the, we were getting the history and things as we were going along, but often what I'd get were things that then I would be told the history afterwards. And in a case like that, okay, I knew that what I was picking up psychically fit. And so I could be pretty confident about that reading.
There is that level of honesty, isn't there, with yourself? Sorry, Claire.
No, it's right.
Well, thank you. I hope so. It's very important. I mean, when it comes down to it, all we have is our integrity in this field, really. And I don't want to. It doesn't do anybody any good to make it up. I want to know the facts.
Claire?
I always say there's a fine line between what's real and what's not. So when you're delivering information to somebody, you need to be saying, it's taken me a long time to understand that myself, actually. There is a fine line between what's real and what's not. So when that information's coming through to you, it's not my imagination, it's definitely psychic. Do you know what I mean? It's definitely coming from spirit. You have to know where that line is. And also, the integrity, you have to. I'm very critical of myself, and I always worry, I don't think that was good enough. I don't think I'm good enough. Can't do it. I always worry like that. But yet everybody will come back for more, or they'll pass my name on. So people are happy with the information that they're receiving. That's really important, that you remain like that. You are, you don't, help me out, Kerry, you don't big yourself up, it's like they were saying in the chat room, about mediums that are trying to tell you this is definite, this is how can you do that? How can you be so specific about things? All that I do is pass on the information. I don't say I know this, this is what I'm being told.
I agree with that. I think, but I also think what happens, and I think it's happened quite a lot recently with there's been a massive spiritual awakening, but alongside that, people haven't done the basics. They haven't actually gone away and learned what it is, how to work, and the way like you said, the way to recognise, is it your imagination? Are you cold reading? Are you just looking at somebody's appearance and making a judgment on that and then getting information saying that's spirit? People aren't actually going to the basics and learning the craft. Whether
it's like learning to drive the car, isn't it?
Exactly.
Not just getting in and driving. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, there's a whole thing about that. So you have to, people, if you're going to work spiritually, there is so much self-examination of your, like we've talked about quite a lot tonight, honesty, self-integrity, and actually knowing yourself. So you go, actually, I'm going to do this. Like I work with energy, and I had a situation. I'm right. Okay, why am I doing this? Am I doing this for me? Am I doing this to serve me? Am I actually really going to be able to take myself out of this and work in a completely non-self way for this particular person? Am I going to be able to do that? Because if for an iota of a second I'm doing this for my own benefit, I shouldn't be doing this, because that's not what I'm here for. I'm here to help. I'm here to be credible and have integrity. And if the minute I put myself, my ego, my needs into any kind of reading, working, energy, whatever it be, then I'm not actually working from the place of higher self. I'm working from my lower self. And that is one of the things that so many people miss in this. And you get new mediums, and I'm not caning anybody, because I think the guts it takes to stand up on stage and try and give a reading is phenomenal, and not something I would ever do myself. But that's not how I work anyway. But I'm just using that as an example, you understand, folks?
Right.
Yep.
I think there's so much that is, people sit in circles and then they're pushed so quickly forward to doing that, when actually the basics, the honesty, the self-work, the integrity, the self-examination needs to be done first. And when you've got those key points in place, then maybe take that step. But that's not being done. And that's leading to a lot of people working in this field, spiritual field in general, that is not actually being addressed in the right way. And I use this example time and time again. Smudging your house. It's a very basic, very simple example. Clare and I had this discussion the other day, and people would just like a smudge stick, open all the windows, go around smudging and go, I've done it. No, you haven't. That's not the point. Intention is key in this, and there is a whole process that starts from actually a basic house clean to finally doing the energy work on the house. There's a complete process in that, and it's the basics aren't being covered, and I think that's being so integral. And teachers like yourself, William, like yourself, Clare, are trying so hard to get that message across, and it's a point that people are missing.
People take up the spirituality of a past group of people that doesn't even have a record of what that spirituality really was, and it's recreated, and they want to call themselves this. I know people that call themselves, they've taken a couple of classes, and so all of a sudden they're a shaman. And I'm thinking, well, shamans spent their whole life training, and part of a tradition that we don't really even understand in this country, anyway, because the cultures didn't have a written language, and then the government forbade so much activity, things were forgotten. And you're a white boy from, with your family background from Europe. How are you a shaman? And wonderful people who really think and mean well, but I think people get so tied up in this idea of needing a spiritual identity that's other than a mainstream religion. And I think that might be part of it, kind of looking for self. And I like to be gentle and nice with people. And I don't claim to be a shaman. Maybe they've got something I don't know about. And I just use that as one example. The idea, you've got people over there that think the Celts built Stonehenge. Well, Stonehenge was vacant for 1,000 years before the Celts arrived. And they may have used it, but they didn't build it.
It boils down to education. It boils down to education. Never stop learning. Research, whatever it is you're going to go into, and keep doing it. Don't just stop just because you think you've... I can sit there and go, I know everything about crystals and minerals. I don't. There are thousands of them. And there are questions I get asked even on some of the basic crystals, and I go, well, I've not heard that one before, but I'll leave it with me. I'll have a look into it. Because you can't stop learning. And like you said before, earlier on in the show, you meet so many different people that have so many different understandings that you'll be a fool not to take that on board.
Exactly. I agree with you.
And on that note, we've actually come to the end of the show, I'm afraid.
Oh, no, I want to keep talking to you, too.
I want to keep talking to you.
I know. We're going to have to come back on this topic another time with William, because it's been a fascinating discussion, as always. Thank you so much, guys, for joining me in the studio tonight. But I am going to have to chip off because, believe it or not, I'm going into another interview on a different network with the wonderful David Cook. So I am going to have to wrap the show up, although normally I'd continue, you know me. Now, this week on Parasearch Radio, tomorrow evening, we've got the Parasearch UK Radio Encore show. We discussed fact or fiction, and the discussion went in so many different areas. That one's well worth a listen to. On Tuesday evening, we've got the Paranormal Concept Show with Mr. Paul Rook and myself. And, well, he still hasn't told me what we're talking about. So, flying by the seat of my pants on that show. Haunted Histories is on Wednesday evening. Oh, and on Wednesday evening, I have a launch of a brand new show at 8 p.m. going live with Mr. Sean Cadman. That is the Supernatural Chat Show, so don't miss that one. So we kick off on Wednesday at 8 p.m. And then on Thursday, we've got the Spectral Zone with the lovely Kaz Rooney. She's talking to Anand Celeste. She's talking more spiritual things like protection, opening, closing, empathy, all those kinds of topics. On the Dark Mirror Show, we are discussing Norse mythology, and I'm so hoping Mr. Andy Mercer can join us to bring some sense to that show. And next Sunday on the Spirit Dimension, I have actually got some shamans in the studio with me. I've got the lovely Crystal Atlantis and the Jackie Manton coming in the studio to tell me all about shamanism. And on that note, thank you once again, William. Thank you, Claire, for joining me in the studio.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. And on that note, everybody, farewell.
Thank you
Bye-bye.
for listening. Don't forget to join us for more shows throughout the week. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, and the World Wide Web to keep up to date with all the shows right here on Parasearch Radio.